Hello, everybody. We're so happy to have Bob Jesselson here. It's a great privilege to get to speak to the author of this, one of the co-authors of this wonderful book. And so, Bob, why don't you tell us about yourself and how you got to undertake this major effort?
Okay. Well, I'll be talking a little bit about how we developed the book, but just for those of you who don't know, I had taught at USC for some 40 years or something here in South Carolina, and I'm now retired and living half-time in Toronto and half-time here in Columbia. And I'll talk a little bit about the book itself after we get started a little bit. So we all know, of course, the importance of scales and arpeggios in music. They're the basic building blocks for Western classical music and jazz and, of course, popular music as well. Anybody who's serious about improving their playing knows that they need to build a good foundation by working on scales and arpeggios. Someone once said that in the beginning there was Bach. We all know, of course, there was a lot of great music before Bach, including some music for solo cello. And so that's not really true. But Bach is a good example. And of course, all of the suites start with either scales or arpeggios. So. So the first suite's arpeggios, second suite. Our arpeggios also. Third suite. Scales, fourth suite. Arpeggios, fifth suite. Scales, and sixth suite. Arpeggios again. And everywhere you look in music, of course, you find scales and arpeggios. In the Beethoven A major sonata, or in the Elgar Concerto, and every place else where you look in music. And not just major and minor scales, we need to know our chromatic scales. Sanson Concerto, or in the Popper Hungarian Rhapsody, and so forth and so on. And other kind of scale systems as well, like modal scales or thumb position scales or octatonic scales. From the Casado Solo Sonata, or Popper Etude number 22, and all over the place, obviously. So scales are the basic operating system for learning and playing music. I used to tell students that scales and arpeggios and technique in general is like a DOS system for computers. The DOS system, as many of you know, used to be the basic operating system for computers. It enabled one to write documents and be creative. But without the DOS system, one couldn't do all the great things that one does with our PCs. If you're old enough to know about that, this metaphor doesn't work so well though with young students. But the idea that scales and arpeggios are our operating system that enables us to play the cello well, to be able to learn music quickly, to come up with good fingerings, and to be able to understand fundamental concepts like intonation, shifting, and even vibrato. So scales and arpeggios can help with learning finger patterns, improving intonation, enhancing coordination, understanding cello geography, strengthening sight reading ability, playing faster and faster and more accurately, building or rebuilding fundamental cello techniques. So I've always emphasized to my students the importance of knowing not just one system of scales and arpeggios, but knowing many different systems, lots of different fingering systems, lots of different bowings and rhythms, knowing different octaves on the cello, knowing lots of different types of scales, and of course knowing the double stops, octaves, thirds, sixths, etc., etc. So scales are a great way to explore the fundamental technical issues which we face as cellists. Not just the intonation, but the coordination, the bow control, tone production, etc., etc. And of course, knowing all the scales and all the different keys, at least the 12 majors, the 12 harmonic minors, the 12 melodic minors, and the 12 natural minors. And having multiple fingering systems for the different scales is very useful in sight reading and in learning new pieces. The quicker one can recognize a new pattern of notes and figure out the appropriate fingering, the faster is the learning process. And for me, just playing the scales and arpeggios is not good enough. It all should be memorized and should take place deep in our body, our mind, and in our psyche, so that they can be pulled out quickly in order to learn new things faster. So if that hopefully doesn't sound scary, it really isn't. If things are taken slowly, one by one, it should be like the way a child goes from crawling to walking to running. I believe that learning cello technique is like studying math or history. In other words, there's a logical sequence of steps that you go through as you learn something as complicated as math or cello playing. In math, you don't do calculus before you learn to add and subtract and do algebra. Unfortunately, many cello teachers have their students playing pieces that are way too hard for the students, and the student can get frustrated and stop. And many people try to play 3 and 4 octave scales before they have mastered 2 octave scales with good intonation, security, and sound. It's like that cartoon of a ladder showing the importance of small steps. You can climb the ladder easily if you go one rung at a time, one step at a time, like on the left side of that cartoon there. If you try to reach too high, it becomes daunting. So the same idea with scales and arpeggios. I believe that it's best to fully and accurately learn one system at a time with all 12 keys and memorizing them with all the correct fingerings. At the same time, one can work on various technical issues. For example, making sure that extensions are working properly, or making sure you know the positions well, or thinking about the 3 principles of tone production, etc., etc. So I don't know if you can read the small print here. Should I try to change the way we're doing this setup here?
It's okay.
It's okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. I don't know if people are looking at their phone and it's hard to read or whatever. So there are obviously a lot of good scale books out there, starting with the Corrette in 1741 and the Braval in 1804. But mostly these scale books focus on just one step in a cellist development, either the early stages, the middle level, or the most advanced level of complicated scales. Even the Foyard Daily Exercises, which is my cello Bible, Terry, you probably remember that we went through that. Even that book really doesn't have it all. There are virtually no publications that provide a complete sequential syllabus for cellists to advance progressively through various systems of scales and arpeggios. I thought for a long time that it would be very useful to have all the different scale systems and fingerings in one place. A few years ago, I was talking about this with a former student of mine, Teddy Buchholz, who's now a professor of cello at the University of Arizona. We were very much on the same page regarding our philosophy of scales and arpeggios. He had studied with me pre-college in Columbia here before moving on to San Francisco Conservatory with Bonnie Hampton, and then further with some other teachers. He agreed that there had been a big hole in the cello literature and that filling this could be helpful to the profession. So we decided to write a book which would reflect our ideas about learning and teaching scales. The book, of course, has just been published now as The Cellist's Guide to Scales and Arpeggios by Mel Bay. And the key to what we're doing in the book is the subtitle. It's a comprehensive, systematic, sequential approach to scales and arpeggios. In other words, we go very systematically through, in sequence, through some of the basic scale and arpeggio systems and working our way through more and more complicated systems. Along the way, we discuss some technical issues that affect the playing of scales and arpeggios, and we also provide access to technical videos demonstrating various issues. One of the special features are the drones that accompany the book, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So according to a compendium of scales by Nicholas Slanimsky, there are some 1,300 different types of scales. And obviously we're not going to go through all of these, but we do hit the highlights in the book of 2-octave, 3-octave, and 4-octave major and minor scales in various fingering systems, plus other kinds of scale systems such as octatonic, chromatic, one-string scales, thumb position, etc., etc. Whoops. So here's the overall schematic for the way we advocate teaching scales in an organized, systematic, sequential way. We start with the basic scales and arpeggios, just 1 octave. Can people see this?
No,
No, now it's getting really tiny.
It's tiny, yeah.
If you could make it bigger.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop share and see. I hope I can get back to the same thing, but let me try. So this is going to look a little weird, I think, the way we do this, but at least you'll be able to see it bigger now, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so you don't see me very much, but you see that. So we start with the basic scales and arpeggios, just 1 octave, and just keys that are in first position or half extended. And then we go to what we call the pre-Foyar system, which takes a cellist chromatically. I can't see it actually, it's very small on my screen. Which takes the cellist chromatically through all the keys, but just does major and minor arpeggios in order to get comfortable with those fundamental chords. Then comes the actual Foyar system. Let's see if I can find, well, you can probably read that. 2-octave scales and arpeggios, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. It's imperative for cellists to know the scales and arpeggios in the neck position in this part of the cello because 90% of our playing involves that part of the cello. And as I said before, these scales and arpeggios should be memorized and internalized, I think. So I could wake you up in the middle of the night and ask you to play a D diminished arpeggio with no problem at all, right? It should be deeply ingrained to help with sight reading, learning new music, figuring out fingerings, and really listening to your own playing, which is a skill all to itself. So after a cellist has really absorbed those elements of playing in the neck position, and after the intonation is pretty reliable, then we jump to the 1-octave thumb position scales, which address the issues higher up on the fingerboard. Let's see, I still can't see it. That's not just a matter of getting comfortable there, but also involves figuring out issues involving contact point and weight as you get closer to the bridge with a shorter string length. After going chromatically up through all the thumb position keys, we're really ready for the 3-octave scales and the 4-octave arpeggios. Next, we focus on issues of going up just 1 string with several different fingerings. And then our so-called around and around system, which deals with velocity and coordination. It's one of my favorite systems, actually, the around and around. Finally, at this point, it's great to go back to the entire range of the cello with a different set of fingerings, the universal fingering system. With that, we can do the Galamian system with all the different rhythm and bowing variations. And of course, then after that, we have lots of choices of where to go. Thirds, sixths, octaves, crosstave scale system, which is a wonderful system, chromatic scales, octatonic scales, whole tone scales, modal scales, etc., etc., etc. It's a lifetime journey, of course. If one's a beginner, one can start at the beginning, the top there. If one's an intermediate player, one can start in the middle someplace. But we really suggest going through the early chapters to make sure that there are no holes in one's technique or one's understanding of the concepts of balance or relaxation or extensions or even knowledge of the neck positions. By the way, my inspiration for writing this book was my granddaughter, Zoe, who started several years ago as a Suzuki student up in Canada. She had a wonderful Suzuki teacher in Toronto, and I watched her progress, and I sat in on lessons and learned so much from her teacher about the Suzuki method. But I realized after a while that she really needed a better organized sequential system for the scales and arpeggios. They weren't really dressing that really well. So we started working together with, well, the 2 octave system and so forth. And now Zoe has just entered the RCM, the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, at age 15. Let's see. So oops, is this the right one? No, sorry. So along the way, with all these scale systems, we address some basic technical issues of the right arm. The 3 principles of tone production, contact point, weight, and speed, maintaining a consistent contact point, core sound, relaxation, and good body mechanics, upper arm, lower arm issues, the elbow going in an arc, important rules for controlling sound, balance, and left-right motion or contrary motion. Obviously, we don't have time here to go through all of these, but I do want to mention the importance of practicing the scales with left-right motion or contrary motion. The concept here is one of balance and also involves coordination. It also helps with being able to get a good sound at the tip where we often have a problem, and finding relaxation at the frog. If you have your cello out and want to try this with me, you're welcome to do it. I just want to demonstrate a little what I mean so that when you see it afterwards in the scales, you'll kind of understand it. So the best way to start is, or basically we want to be at the frog here, we want to be very relaxed with the arm, and we're going to go in the opposite direction, so the body is going to go to the left while the bow goes to the right, to the tip. And this way you get a balance that's going to this place here. We're not exactly in the center of the cello because we're over on the right side, but the balance remains in this place. You're balancing your arm with your body. And so you get relaxation at the frog and you get more sound at the tip. Of course, there are other issues involving the elbow and the lower arm and upper arm, but this is the left-right motion. And of course, sophisticated cellists will move in all different kind of directions, including with the bow. But I think this particular left-right motion with a contrary motion is particularly important for working on scales and working on sound. And so I recommend doing that at least in the early stages of learning all of these scales and arpeggios. And you'll see me using the left-right motion as I demonstrate some of the scales afterwards. And if you're interested in finding out more about how I go about teaching left-right motion, which is a sort of a process, you can check out then my warm-up blog. I have the website there. I can send it to you afterwards if you're interested. So the ideal time for ingraining many of those right-hand technical issues is through the scales, even though scales, of course, you think left hand is intonation and all that, but there's really a lot about the bow that we can work on and think about and fix if there are problems in working on the scales. So practicing scales is not just about practicing for intonation. It really involves thinking about these fundamental right arm techniques. But of course, working on the left hand is the critical focus of playing scales. And we need to work on things like left hand positions or extensions, what I call the 5-step process for intonation, and the 5-step process for training extensions, rather. And there's also a 5-step process for training intonation, but and cello positions. Knowing the cello positions is really important, I think, especially for the younger people at the age of learning the 2-octave scales and arpeggios. So we don't have time to go through all of this either right now, but I did want to mention in particular the cello positions because I think that does get sort of glossed over sometimes by cello teachers. So I've often been really surprised that even advanced cellists in college don't really know their fingerboard very well. A lot of very fine players and teachers forget that they themselves learned how to play the cello using the positions when they were young, but they forget to teach it to their students or are uninterested in teaching it to their students. I think that knowing the positions cold can be a very useful tool for organizing our understanding of the geography of the cello. Knowledge of the positions is a fundamental way of knowing the latitude and longitude on the cello and knowing how intervals relate across the strings. So sometimes people teach first position and fourth position because you can reach most of the notes that way, but really that's not enough. one needs to know second and second and a half position and fifth position and fifth and a half position and so forth. And this is really a kind of a cello geography lesson. And it's not something you learn in one day. It takes a while to absorb how this works. But knowing the positions is really an important tool for knowing and understanding the cello. So this is the diagram of cello positions. I'll be referring to it again when we discuss the 2-octave scales and arpeggios. And I'm not going to really take time now to go through it. I think most of you are familiar enough with it. But as you notice here, I identify the positions up through 7th position. So not just, I consider that neck position because the thumb is still, or can be still, behind the cello when you're going to a C or a C sharp here with first finger on the A there. And part of the training of all of these scales and arpeggios is really understanding how even that area there, that sort of mystery positions of the what I call the Bermuda Triangle of the cello, that's important to know. Fifth and a half, sixth and a half, and those positions. So obviously working on scales and arpeggios means working on intonation. And we have several chapters in the book which discuss intonation, starting with helpful ways to improve intonation, checking intonation with open strings, the 5-step process for playing in tune, which I mentioned before, the 3 basic tuning systems, and the Mary system. And if we have time today, I want to talk more about the so-called Mary system and how we use that. Hopefully we'll have enough time for that. We'll see. So moving along, I want to go through now a couple of the scale systems and demonstrate some of them. But first, I mentioned the importance of practicing with drones. And so I want to talk for a second about these drones, which are not some sort of unmanned vehicle drone, but and it's also not some sort of male wasp or bee. A drone in our usage is a sustained pitch that provides a foundation for a melody, or in this case, a scale or arpeggio. And it's useful to practice with drones in order to hear the interval between the sustained note and each degree of the scale that we play. So for example, here is a sustained C drone as the tonic for a C scale. These drones accompany the book, and this particular one, a tonic drone, goes on for 10 minutes, and so you could play, a passage that you're working on in Bach or whatever, or the scales with some of the systems that we don't have the drones for example, doing sixths or octaves or something, and just have a tonic drone like that. So our drone audio was created using samples of real string instruments to offer a symphonic kind of sound. It has a natural resonance and a small amount of vibrato to help beautify the sound. My former student Ryan Knott, who I mentioned before, he created all the drones, and I think he did a great job with it. Some of you may know Ryan from the orchestra in Charlotte, where he plays sometimes. So, by the way, if you want to take out your cello, you can play along with some of the drones. You're muted, I guess, but you can hear the drones. And if we have time, I'll try to get to the Mary system, and you might be interested in trying that out if you have your cello also. So next I want to show you the chordal drones that go with the first chapter of the book. In the first chapter, we do the simple 1-octave scales and arpeggios in the most basic keys, just C, G, D, and F, that require no extensions. And the keys that require some extensions but no shifting, for example, the 1-octave E flat and B flat, and the A and 2-octave D scales. So here's an example of the chordal drones in C. I'll just play a little bit of it so you get an idea. So this is now the scale. here. So we also, with this system, do 2 notes to a bow and 4 notes to a bow to work on coordination, the left-right motion, the contact point, and so forth. We also have rhythms that are commonly used in the Suzuki method for those basic keys. So if any of you are Suzuki teachers, you may find this useful with your students. So first of all, there's Mississippi Hot Dog. And there's Happy, I'm Happy, that one. And so forth. And just move it ahead here. And then there's this one. Run Pony, Run Pony. And lots of other ones like that. So intonation is obviously a big topic when playing scales. Let's see here. Actually, I think I skipped a slide. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. We also have a jazz version in every key. And the kids really enjoy the jazz version. Let me see if I can find that one. I think it's this. Yeah. And these are, of course, in every key. There we go. So intonation is obviously a big topic when playing scales. The perfect intervals have to be really perfect, as you know, and but there could be some degree of interpretation with major and minor intervals like the seconds and thirds and sixths and sevenths. In working with the tonic drone that we had earlier, you can use either harmonic or melodic tuning, either just intonation or Pythagorean intonation, which we discuss in the book, however you're wanting to hear that when you use that tonic drone. But when using the chordal drones, the ones that I've been using now, it's best really to use the harmonic tuning. So the difference is that in melodic tuning, you can bend the pitches a little bit. So the thirds and sevenths in a major scale are a bit higher, or in a minor scale, the third is lower. This is the idea behind Casals' expressive intonation. And you can do that with a tonic drone, but with the harmonies of the chords, you need to use harmonic tuning or just intonation. In other words, the thirds are a bit lower in the major or a bit higher in the minor, just like when playing in a quartet. So most of you probably understand all that, so I won't take the time to demonstrate that right now. But for the 2-octave scales in arpeggios, we start with the Foyar system, our cello Bible, my cello Bible. We use the bowing system that we call 1, 2, and 4 to a bow, and then we do the off-the-string strokes that are working on spiccato and sautillier. And if you do this every day, starting with a metronome marking of 50 or so, and slowly working it up to 70 or 80 over several weeks or months, you develop a good sautillier without even knowing it. That's been my experience with my pre-college kids, that I do this with them every week, and then a couple of months in to taking lessons, they're already playing a sautillier without even realizing that they were learning the sautillier. So in this example that I'll give now, I'll start with the 4 notes to a bow, followed by the off-the-string strokes, duples, triplets, 16th notes, sextuplets, and octuplets. So I'm coming in the middle here. This is 4 notes to a bow. strokes, going through that whole pattern, starting with duples. That I did use vibrato for these off the string strokes in particular because of the coordination kind of thing that you learn by doing this kind of stroke, one kind of motion with the bow and another kind of motion here. So I do vibrato, encourage the students to do vibrato for these. And for the scales and arpeggios, generally no vibrato, although as you get more advanced, then I think you can play scales with vibrato or without vibrato for intonation, with vibrato for the coordination and just for the understanding of the sound and so forth. For the arpeggios in the 2-octave system, we provide the scales and the arpeggios also in all the keys, but you'll notice that we have a little line under the notes to write in the positions. So you'll see here that you can see there a little line under each of these in the book. And I think it's really critical to be thinking in terms of the positions when learning these scales and arpeggios, not so much the fingerings. If we think of the positions, we feel groups of notes, several notes at a time. If you think of fingerings at this point in the development of a cellist, it's just note, 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 one note at a time. And this makes it difficult to play with flow or to play faster. The positions help with the geography of the neck position of the cello, and it makes also memorization much easier. So we recommend what we call block positions and no vibrato. Of course, in addition to the positions, one should always be thinking about the notes, the names of the notes, but it helps people with learning the instrument to know and understand the positions themselves. Our brain has multiple memory systems, and obviously we should be using our oral memory for knowing how it sounds, but reinforcing it with our physical memory, the kinesthetic memory, our analytical memory, knowing the names of the notes, the intervals, and the names of the chords, and using our left brain as well as our right brain. I think it's really important to write in all the positions as one learns and memorizes each scale and arpeggio. That's what I do with my pre-college kids, and then when I was teaching in college, sometimes with the undergraduates who really didn't understand their positions. They would actually write in, as you can see those little lines there, they would write in the music, and the process of writing also helps a student to ingrain the information and helps with the memory. So in the back of the book, here, we provide a kind of cheat sheet with the positions written in already, in case you're not certain of the positions when you go through it. So we have it there so you can check how well you're understanding it as you're going through the somewhat more complicated F sharp or F sharp minor or whatever scales, where you may be a little bit confused by some of the positions. So if one has never done this before, I would suggest actually working on each key for a week, so week by week. So it needs a minimum of 12 weeks for learning and memorizing these scales and arpeggios in 2 octaves. And then probably repeating it at least one more time to really ingrain it. So it probably takes about a half a year to get all of this solidly learned. But by doing so, you'll have a really good foundational knowledge of the neck part of the cello. And those of you who are teachers, I think this is really important for the students. And even if you're an advanced cellist, if you've never really done this before, I think it would be a really great way to revisit this part of the cello, the neck positions and so forth. Be a great summer project or whatever coming up. So here, for example, is the C major 2-octave arpeggio system with the drones. The arpeggios are from the 4-hour system again: minor, major, dominant 7th, subdominant, relative minor, diminished 7th, and dominant 7th in the new key. So I'll just go through that. Distracted by the technology for a second. So after the 2-octave scales and arpeggios are well absorbed, which obviously they're not right now for me, the next step is to deal with the other half of the cello, and that's playing in thumb position. So the basic organization of thumb position is a perfect fourth between the thumb and the 3rd finger on the same string and an octave across the strings. And the other main issue includes the shape of the thumb. It's what I call the innie and the outie. The strongest kind of way of organizing the thumb is what I call the innie and the outie. The one joint in and the other joint kind of out. Some people need to strengthen and train these joints so they're really stable, and I advise doing some isometric exercises to strengthen those joints and the ligaments. And there should be a C shape when you look down the fingerboard, so the fingers are able to lift and articulate well. So the thumb position scales and arpeggios are just 1 octave at first, and the nice thing is that the fingering is really the same for all the keys going up the fingerboard. But there are other issues to consider, including the contact point getting closer to the bridge, and then especially weight, arm weight. In the lower part of the cello, when you play closer to the bridge, you need more arm weight. But in the upper part of the cello, one doesn't need more weight when you get closer to the bridge. However, a fast bow speed is essential. So these scales, we advocate doing them two to a bow, so we use a lot of bow speed. And we'll be doing the major and all three of the minors. So here's an example of that. D major. And the next one, let's see here. So then for the next thing that we do is the arpeggios in thumb position. Now, the same set of 7 arpeggios as the 2-octave system. And here's an example of that. So the most difficult part here is the diminished and the last dominant seventh, because the arm has to actually move forward, so the first finger is a half step higher than in the scale and in the other arpeggios. But I found that when students really hear the diminished seventh in tune, their intonation level goes up significantly. And this is true also with the 2-octave arpeggio system. It seems like hearing a succession of minor thirds in the diminished arpeggio, including an augmented second, is significantly more difficult than hearing a major arpeggio with the alternating thirds and a fourth. And I guess that's why pop music rarely uses a diminished seventh chord. It's just harder to hear and less appealing to an untrained ear or something. despite the fact that it's such an important chord in classical music traditions. But I think there's something that literally changes in the brain when students can hear a diminished seventh really in tune. Okay, so then if we have time, I can just I'll just demonstrate well, I just did the arpeggios. Okay, so I don't know how our time is right now. We have about 10 minutes, I guess, if there are any questions. By the way, the mascot that you've seen earlier there is also in the book. It's the crazy cellist with the flying bows, and she helps you kind of think about various things, technically and whatever. If there are no questions, I'll go on with the Mary system. But Debbie, did you want to?
I don't see any questions here, so
Okay, no questions. Okay, so you want me to go on with
please do.
Okay, so I think the Mary system is a very useful way of organizing our thinking about finger spacing and intervals on the cello. If one understands the patterns, it's a lot easier to use music. So music is to learn music rather. Music is filled with patterns, and knowing the patterns can help us learn faster. So our basic cello finger is based on the use of 3 fingers in a grouping, and it's helpful to use a little melody like Mary Had a Little Lamb to figure out these spacings. So what I call a major Mary is so it's in half extended position in this version, and if you play it, try to do the bow distribution that's listed there underneath the notes. So you're in the lower half of the bow, all the way out using left-right motion, coming all the way back, and then the rest of it is in the upper half of the bow. The point of this, though, is that these are really 2 whole steps from the bottom to the top. So you have a whole step, and that turns into this major Mary. Next, we can play the Mary tune with a whole step and a half step, and that will be in first position. Same bow distribution. And we call that a minor Mary because a minor scale begins that way. Next, we'll play the melody with a C natural, so we get a half step and then a whole step. And we call this a modal Mary or a Phrygian Mary because a Phrygian scale starts that way. And there's also a chromatic Mary. Those would be that would be the next one. So to summarize, these are all the combinations of whole and half steps, just 4 possibilities. But much of our playing in neck position is really rooted in those 4 positions, 4 things. So we have a major Mary, whole step, minor Mary, whole step, half, modal Mary, half whole, and chromatic Mary, half, half. There are actually a few others, such as an augmented Mary, but that's not so important at this point. So how can we use this information? Well, one of the most important fingering systems for scales is the so-called universal system, in which all the neck position scales can be played with the same fingering. And that's obviously very useful. So all of our major scales use that formula, major, major, modal, modal, minor. So let's say a D scale, major, major, modal, modal. So all of our major scales are built that same way. So that was the D scale, and you see it sort of written out with the major, major, so forth. Whoops, I just went back. And an F scale, let's say, would be, and so forth. Same pattern of major, major, modal, modal. So it's nice to have a system like that of all the same kind of fingerings, and all the scales have that same pattern. And we can do the same with the minor scales, knowing the formula for a minor scale and so forth. Um, and then we can do a similar analysis with thumb position scales, except that now we have four notes in our hand rather than three. So as a result, we work with tetrachords, groupings of four notes. And the spacing between the notes can be either half steps, whole steps, or augmented seconds. With the four notes in the tetrachord, we have many more possibilities for combinations of these intervals. So it's useful to give these tetrachords some names in order to identify the patterns more easily. So we have a major tetrachord, a minor tetrachord, a Phrygian, harmonic minor, chromatic, a Lydian, octatonic, and a Hungarian. So we have all these different patterns that we can then use in ways for making scales. For example, the major scale is basically a symmetrical scale of a major tetrachord and another major tetrachord. Major and major. A Dorian scale is a minor and a minor, and a Phrygian is a modal and a modal. And you can analyze these things in this way for all different kinds of scales, and lots of different ways of seeing these tetrachords. We got the major Dorian, natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, and so forth and so on. And there's lots more that are very useful to kind of get in your hand and practice and memorize, because they come up again and again, especially in contemporary music and in jazz. So I think we probably have reached the end of the journey for today. It's almost 8 o'clock. And I hope you've also reached nirvana then, or at least enjoying endorphins and feeling mindful. So.
Well, this is absolutely great, Bob. Who has any questions they would like to still ask?
I have a question. I just wanted to know, so how do you listen to the drones if they're in the book?
Oh, there are QR codes that if you get the electronic version of the book, you can click on, there's a clickable link or something. But if you get the hard copy of that, there are these QR codes that you probably can see here. I don't know.
Yes, yes.
That you just click, you just go on those with the phone and so forth, and then it comes up. It comes up the whole sequence of different keys and the different systems. Yeah, each QR code is a different system.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, the technology was interesting to work on, both with Ryan here, but also with the publisher Mel Bay, who had never done anything like this before. So it was quite complicated at first, and it took us about 2.5 years to work on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can't imagine, but
it was a great project. It was a lot of fun working with Teddy, because as a former student, we were on the same wavelength about a lot of things, and he had then worked with some other teachers after that, so he had new ideas for me. I learned a lot of stuff working with him, but it was a great partnership. Really fun.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you. Sharon, did you have a question?
I do, and it's sort of similar. Bob, are you playing with an iPad yet?
No.
And Debbie, are you?
Afraid not.
Oh gosh, so you might not be able to answer this. So I am, and what I would like is an electronic version of this book that I can put on the iPad as opposed to the Kindle. And the Kindle software, the Kindle app on the iPad does not transfer material, and they consider their PDFs proprietary. And I can't figure out a way to get anything from the Kindle into Fourscore, which is the app that handles my music and handles thousands of other people's music too. I mean, this is kind of a big deal.
I see. Nobody's asked that before, and I'm not familiar enough myself. But if you maybe the best thing is if you put it in an email to me, I can then send it to the publisher and see what if there's some option with that. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
because the only other option I can figure out is just to buy the hard copy of the book and scan it and put it in manually,
I
which
see.
is not the end of the world, but I'd rather not.
So, how did you get the electronic version of it?
On Amazon, it offers it as a Kindle version.
Okay, there are, there are different electronic versions. I know through Cello Bello there's one, and
Ah.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the same thing then.
Is it
Um,
do you know if do you know if they are PDF files?
I don't think it's PDF files because that way it could be shared and people, that's what the publisher was trying to avoid. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't know the technology well enough, but I
Okay.
don't think it's actually a PDF file.
I'll look on Cellabello. Okay, I didn't realize there
Yeah.
were multiple electronic versions. Great. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure if they're different, as I said, but if you want to just send me an email then and explain what it is in words that I won't try to screw up as I say it, then I can ask the publisher. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else? One question I have, Bob, is how do you work on this with your students? Do they play the scales for you in lessons?
Oh yeah, every lesson I divide the lessons into scales and arpeggios, exercises, etudes, and then the repertoire pieces. And I am very religious about about having them do the scales and arpeggios because if I don't, I know they really don't practice it well. So I don't spend too much time with it, especially if they know their stuff. But in the beginning, I spend a lot because that's the way to deal. I think that's the way to deal with a lot of the technical issues and just make them aware. Also to train the brain for memorization. They have to come in with it memorized each week. And then that whole sautelier stuff. If they're every week they're doing that, the eighth notes and so forth, and getting up through the octuplets, they're really doing the sautelier before they even know it. So I say, what kind of stroke is that? And all of a sudden, I ask if they've ever played sautelier before, and they say, no, I never played that before. But then I say, well, yeah, you have. You've been playing it, every week in the lesson.
May I ask a question, Bob?
Yeah.
I want to tell you, I'm really impressed by these drones because with that harmonic richness, I think that can reinforce intonation learning really beautifully. So you don't necessarily do that with them at the lessons, do you? I mean, at the lessons, you just play in unisons with them or octaves with them?
Usually, but I have sometimes done it occasionally do it with them just to see how they're using it and if they're using it right. Yeah. Uh, both, both ways. Yeah. Often I often just drone on the cello. Yeah.
Anyone else? I'm sorry you didn't get to your round robin playing.
Oh, the around and around system. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're interested in it, you can see it we have these instructional videos that go with the book also you get through the QR codes in the book. And I have a demonstration of that, of playing that. It's one of my favorite ones to do. I like playing that.
Mhm. Well, as if there's nobody else, then I guess it's time to thank you for this wonderful addition to the pantheon of things that can help us become better cellists and better teachers.
Thanks so much, everybody, for being here, and it's great seeing some of my old colleagues and friends and and former students and so forth. It's wonderful. So
Marvelous.
thanks so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
Great
Okay.
evening.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Hi, Bob. It was good seeing you again.
Great seeing you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Bob.
yeah.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.